There's a lot of pressure because actually there's quite a lot of seats that are not filled yet with Conservative candidates. So I saw somewhere it could be nearly over 100, maybe 150, which is really worrying in the middle of an election campaign. And it just adds to this narrative that people were not ready and this was probably a bit rushed and just quite an instinctive thing from the Prime Minister. And you could say, fine, that's up to him. It was his
Instinctive.
decision. But
He's not the most instinctive of guys. Everything is thought through like AI.
well, yes, but this was something that a lot of people thought perhaps perhaps he might do it now, but the conventional wisdom was he would do it a bit later on. But whatever the decision he's made, he hasn't really taken the party machine necessarily with him, or the people who then have to go and make the case for him, or have to go and knock on doors. There is reports of some MPs not even having their literature printed yet, the leaflets that need to go onto the streets. So I think he's battling this internal frustration.
Well, let's hear now from the former Chief Downing Street press officer, Mo Hussein. Good evening, Mo.
Hi, Henry.
Hi. Now, if, as Kevin Marr suggests, the question is, why should the government get 5 more years? Just looking at the front page of the Times, Michael Gove and Andrea Leadsom seem to have given their answer. It shouldn't, and they're off.
Yeah, and I suspect there'll be several others who will follow their lead as well. I think the way that the Prime Minister announced the election and the timing of it has really forced people's hand. There'll be people who've been thinking about this for a while, and now they haven't got a few more months to make a decision. I think has probably pushed them slightly over the edge. And also, there'll be people after many years of serving as ministers and having been around that table in the cabinet and having been MPs, are probably looking at, is there a different work-life balance, lucrative career outside as well? And with the chips looking like they're going to fall a certain way, if you've been in government, being in opposition isn't going to be much fun. You may never have been in opposition before. So I think all of these things are weighing on people's minds.
Yeah, I'm just looking again at the Times front page for tomorrow morning. Exodus of MPs piles pressure on Rishi Sunak. How much pressure, and how do you think he'll respond?
There's a lot of pressure because actually there's quite a lot of seats that are not filled yet with Conservative candidates. So I saw somewhere it could be nearly over 100, maybe 150, which is really worrying in the middle of an election campaign. And it just adds to this narrative that people were not ready and this was probably a bit rushed and just quite an instinctive thing from the Prime Minister. And you could say, fine, that's up to him. It was his decision.
But he's not the most instinctive of guys. Everything is thought through like AI.
Well, yes, but this was something that a lot of people thought perhaps perhaps he might do it now, but the conventional wisdom was he would do it a bit later on. But whatever the decision he's made, he hasn't really taken the party machine necessarily with him, or the people who then have to go and make the case for him, or have to go and knock on doors. There is reports of some MPs not even having their literature printed yet, the leaflets that need to go onto the streets. So I think he's battling this internal frustration and annoyance with lots of MPs who are not happy with the process of this, and that will have an impact on what they say or do publicly.
Why was this not foreseen? I mean, he's got top brains around him. He's got this guy, Isaac Levido, and, people who he's chosen and whose judgment he trusts. Why on earth did he do this?
Well, look, I think this has been the core debate amongst the people who are the closest to him. If you read any of the reports this morning, it's been briefed that Isaac was supportive of going long and letting people feel the impact of the tax cuts the government has recently announced, or this fall in inflation. People obviously don't feel anything straight away just because the number has changed. But there were other people who probably made the argument, is it going to get any better than this? So you have this choreography of slightly better economic news recently on growth, on inflation, and you think, well, do we go now and make it look like this is working and give us another chance, or do you potentially squander it and people forget about this and more things go wrong? And that is a judgment only the Prime Minister can make. It's not scientific. It has to be his gut reaction, and I think he came down on the side of maybe it's not going to get better and there is more
Yeah,
scope of things without my control going wrong. So let's go now. But that doesn't mean it was a uniform decision. It was
sure.
doesn't mean that everyone's happy about it.
And Mo, tomorrow's Times also reporting a new poll giving Labour a 22-point lead. Why do you think there's been no bounce so far for the Prime Minister?
Well, look, I think we've had lots of versions of the prime minister, lots of reinventions, lots of real attempts to try and get things kick-started again, and none of it seems to have worked. Whether it's veering towards the right, coming back to more the centre ground, being the change candidate, not being the change candidate, and I think it speaks to general dissatisfaction, um, general people maybe not listening, people maybe turning off, and also there is this thing around unknown voters, people who haven't made their minds up fully yet, and people in that category would probably say, well, it's still a while away, we don't know yet. Let's maybe see what both sides, both main parties have got to say. Well, that time has now come,
Yeah.
so maybe you will see a bit of a shift in the poll. But I think consistent poll leads are the way we have seen. Of course, the polls will tighten, but it just feels to me, and this is quite a dangerous place for the prime minister. If whatever he says, people aren't really listening and aren't really taking it in. And even a small point, but some of the announcements the prime minister has made, things he clearly feels very strongly about, like banning smoking in the wash-up period, which is when Parliament has to resolve issues and shut down. A lot of this stuff is not going to be made into law. So that again fuels this narrative of promises made but not being delivered. And there's a process point around that, but it does add to this like no one's listening and nothing is actually being done.
Yeah. Meanwhile, his last but one predecessor, Boris Johnson, on the front page of another newspaper saying Starmer would be the most dangerous and left wing Labour PM since the 1970s. That's not going to cut it. The public see him as a centrist, Starmer, not a left winger.
Yeah, and there's clearly history there when they were facing each other across the dispatch box when Boris was PM. But I think one thing that is clear about Labour, it's a hugely different Labour Party to what it was 3 or 4 years ago, and quite proudly so. Just even the optics of Keir Starmer doing his launch in front of the Union Jack flags, that wouldn't have happened under the previous leader. Focus on security, focus on national interest. So that has changed, and I think that kind of thing does cut through with people. And I think the challenge for Labour is being even more clear about its policy positions and what they look to do if they do get into power. But I think that criticism of being the most left wing leader will fall flat. I
Yeah.
think with quite a few people.
It sounds to me as though you're happy to be shot of all this. Mo, if you were still working with the Tories, what would you be saying to them?
Well, I mean, I would kind of say, look, it's the PM doesn't have very many cards to play
Yeah.
in this at all. The one thing that he can credibly do is talk about how when he came into this job, the situation was very, very difficult, and be honest about why. Yes, there were global factors, but there was also a disastrous mini budget left
Yeah.
by his predecessor. And if anything, he's trying to make best of this. It's not perfect, it will take more time, but that doesn't really win elections. People don't thank you
No, and
retrospectively
also,
for
I
what
mean, the
you've done.
people
They
who,
want to know what you're going to do.
sure, and the people who did that mini budget were Conservative prime ministers and
Correct,
chancellors.
exactly.
Mo, thank
Exactly.
you very much. Pleasure. Have a great weekend. Thank you
Thank
very
you.
much to
You
Mo
too.
Hussein, former chief press officer at Downing Street.